Hello everyone and welcome to this new video session on the next chapter that is opening a new topic really called alternative lifestyles. The reason I selected this topic is because in the examinations you may be given subjects which are dealing with the societal changes that are going on at the moment. And among those changes, one of them is this crazy concept that maybe in the future we will not need work as a necessity. Working to live will not be required anymore. You might already think about the reasons why this is, such as automation, the rise of robots. More and more work can be automated today, so be careful with this word. By the way, automation is the word we use when machines are taking over humans. So all these questions raise this idea that, not raise the idea, but raise the question that we might get rid of or discard the concept of work. Get rid of. The article I selected comes from the Times this time, so not the Guardian, but the Times, and is entitled Post-Work, the Radical Idea of a World Without Jobs. So the way I'm going to go through this is that obviously I start with the title and the header as usual, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Today I want to focus on language more than the content, which I think is not so difficult to grasp. So I'm going to go through the questions that are part of the leaflet I sent you in a PDF by mail. And in order to do so, I will have to go through the text and explain a few things, clarify a few things, or shed light on a few aspects. So if I get started with this title, as I said, what is outstanding in this idea is that it's a very radical idea. Right, it's something that has been ingrained in the mind of people. To be ingrained. This is deep-rooted, so I remain in the field of the vegetable world, in the plant world. So deep-rooted, or you could say this is deeply ingrained, something you could use as well. This is anchored in our mindset that working is necessary, right? You will earn your living by the sweat of your brow. That comes from the Bible, which means you will have to work in order to live, right? This is a very biblical injunction, and yet this is something that we rely on and that you are working for at the moment. That's the reason why you study, possibly, maybe not, to be discussed later, but this idea that we do work because it has become a necessity, that once again is questionable. Some people think that they are self-sustainable, but self-sustainable means you do not need anything or anyone to live. You grow your own vegetables, you live by yourself on your own, but in order to do so you still need to work if you want to grow your vegetables. So work as in general is something that has been imposed upon us on the nature of our human being, right? Now, the radical idea of a world without jobs. So this time we are not talking about, as I've just mentioned, work in general, but jobs in particular. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we will stop working altogether. We still need to have this society running, and in order to do so, you will still have to wake up in the morning and get things done, basically. Now, a world without jobs is something that is obviously threatening the human beings, as I mentioned, due to automation, due to this idea that we will be replaced by a more technological world. Now, if you have a look at this first, at this header, pretty much, work has ruled our lives for centuries. Right. So this is just, that is what I would call a general statement, like what you would write in a synthesis. It's an opening sentence that already placed the subject. I draw your attention, there you go, I'm looking for my highlighter. I draw your attention to the grammar. So the reason why we use this present perfect here is due to the use of for centuries. So I know that for some of you that's quite obvious, for others it's not, so make sure, especially when you use this introductory sentence, to use a present perfect. That's usually what we use in order to to take stock of what happened in the previous centuries or previous times. So work has ruled our lives for centuries, and it does so. I really love this expression here. What does so refer to? It refers to work has ruled our lives, and you can replace this entire sentence by using so, and it does so today more than ever. So we are being told that work apparently is dominating our lives. It's the top priority in our lives, right? But, and this is always the most interesting part to me, it's this but. When you see such a word, you know that a paradox is introduced, that a contention is introduced, that there's something to talk about, right? Because if we just said, well, work is important, is essential in our lives, full stop, bye, well, that's it. But now, if you want to introduce this idea that it's not as relevant as it seems, or it's not as obvious as it seems, then you say, but. A new generation of thinkers insists there is a watershed alternative. Ha! So the paradox is interesting because we are being told that it might not be the case anymore in the future. Now, once again, I would like to stress this word here. This is one of those pre-engineering school vocabulary that we expect you to know. This is the type of vocabulary you absolutely need to know. You will find this in pretty much all the papers in the exams. A watershed moment is a typical word. You could say it's a pivotal moment. Really try to learn those words. They're almost expected, right? When you discuss something, might it be during the oral exams or on your paper, in your papers. So pivotal, momentous. It's another one you could use as an adjective, right? You could say it's a milestone. So carry on here. It's a milestone, or it's a landmark. If you use it as a noun, it's landmark. It's a turning point, pretty much. This is closer to the French. So a revolution is coming, right? Let's move on. The first question you were asked was, how significant is work in today's society? You will have noticed by now, because you've been working with me for 6 months, that the order of the question goes through like the order of the text. So obviously we will get started with the beginning, with the start of the article in order to answer this question. How significant, for those who do not know this, significant, important. How important, how essential, how vital is work in today's society? So let's have a look. Let's read at the beginning and see which information we're given. So work is the master of the modern world. For most people, it's impossible to imagine society without it. Right. Once again, for most people, not everybody apparently, right? It dominates and pervades everyday life. Pervades is also one of those words. It's pretty similar to this, the importance of the word watershed that I have just emphasized. Pervade is an interesting word that you should, well, get in your vocabulary box. To pervade, to permeate. Okay, to invade, pretty much. It invades our everyday life. Especially in Britain and the US, Anglo-Saxon world are focused on work. It's like work and play. It's a really like work hard, play hard, right? This idea that you have to be on the go all the time. You have to work. The number of working hours is like much more significant and substantial than in European countries. So more completely than at any time in recent history. So this is an interesting fact already. In 2020, because this article actually dates back from 2018, so 2 years ago, in the times in which we live, we would have thought that by now we have made our lives easier, that we have alleviate, or relieved our lives of the burdens, okay, to relieve your life of a burden, which means like things that are difficult to do, okay, burden. Let me clarify this because I know some of you will probably write barden, sorry, so burden, there you go, and to alleviate. But apparently this is not the case. This is not so, right? Apparently we are still under the stress of having to work really hard. An obsession, see that word is very strong, an obsession with employability runs through education. If I translate this really in like differently, if I rephrase this, what it means is that the reason why you study and the reason why you get an education is because you are obsessed, as they say, or you've got a fixation on how employable you will be. So what type of jobs you will be given. You study in order to get a good job. That's pretty much the idea. And the longer you study, usually the better the job. Even severely disabled welfare claimants, interesting word. See, this is the type of word you can try to collocate together. Welfare claimants are people who are asking, or who not asking for, but people who receive benefits from the state or allowances from the state, money pretty much from the state. So even severely disabled welfare claimants are required to be work seekers. To seek is to look for. So when you are a work seeker, you're basically looking for a job. Okay, you're unemployed. Now, I really enjoy grammar because it gives you a lot of indication. They are required to. Here, the passive form indicates that it's not necessarily them who are willing to, who are intent on finding a job. They are required to. They are asked to do this. Especially in Britain and the US, even if you suffer from a condition or you're unemployed, you will have requirements that you cannot turn down many jobs unless you are not given the money that you are due by the state. So it's much more difficult than, as I said, other countries such as France or other European countries. Like the restrictions on how much money you receive from the states is determined by your determination to find a job. Right. So it's very serious, right? Even severely disabled people who are probably limited in the number of options they can have in terms of employment. Now, moving on. Corporate superstars show off their epic work schedule. So corporate is another word. We have already seen this together for company. So I'm thinking corporate superstars, I'm thinking Elon Musk or all these jazz, all this type of entrepreneurs, very famous, very hype, very hip, okay, very fashionable. Well, according to some standards, they're showing off. To show off is to boast, which means you're very proud of what you're doing. So you show other people what you do in order to be gratified and to take satisfaction from it. So they show off their epic work schedules. Look how much I work. I wake up at 5 a.m. to practice what we call, have you ever heard of this? The miracle morning. Miracle morning. This concept that you wake up earlier in the morning, some of you will definitely not agree with this. You wake up at 5 a.m, like let's say 2 hours before you're due to, well, you're meant to wake up, and you start doing a lot of things that you will probably not have the time to do over the course of the day, such as, I don't know, sport. A lot of people do sport, go for a jog at 5 a.m. Well, not that you can today, but at the time when we could go out, you would. Or they will start writing a book in the morning, or they'll start cooking for the rest of the week. Like they will cook in the morning for all the meals in the week, or they will basically make the most of that time in the morning. Really interesting concept, really hippie concept, really. So you can have a look into this. So carrying on, hardworking families are idealized by politicians. Why is the journalist using these inverted commas? It's very ironical. He's trying to show that hardworking families, what is it? It's a concept according to which, I'm going to try to write this because it's an interesting grammar point. It's a concept according to which, or whereby, which is a bit more archaic but more formal, whereby families are looking for jobs. They do have jobs, they work hard to look after the children, they do everything that is expected from them as citizens. That's what a hard-working family is. They try not to sponge off the state. It's a bit derogatory to say so. To sponge off the state means to receive money from the states for nothing. Okay, so that's a derogatory term. Derogatory means it's a bit insulting. Okay, derogatory. That's a word that you see quite a lot, especially in tabloids. All these people sponging off the state, right? Free riders, as we call them. Now, carrying on. Friends pitch each other's business ideas, so it's really cool to compete with your friends to see who gets the best ideas. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Social Network with Mark Zuckerberg and how the whole Facebook affair started, but that's the idea. Tech companies persuade their employees that round-the-clock work is play. Round-the-clock work means that you work 24/7, pretty much. So all day, all week, you work round the clock, all time, and that it's fun. Okay, London has made it, New York City to a point as well, but London has made this typical representation of people in the city, and they go to work and they seem to have fun, and they've got the after work hours, you know, it's where you go to a pub and you have fun with the colleagues that you work with. So work is play. That's the idea. Now, gig economy companies, gig economy companies claim that round the clock work is freedom. Right. So this is very paradoxical. Let's just stop for a moment on this word, the gig economy. This is something we may have mentioned already in class. I can't remember now, to be honest. For those who don't know, I'm going to have to just remove some of the content here. So let me take that off. Oops, not what I wanted. There you go. So a gig may mean different things. Usually a gig is a concert. That's what we call a concert. If it's a small concert, you don't call it a concert. You won't say, oh, I saw a concert in a pub. You saw a gig. It's a performance, pretty much. Okay, that's what it means. It's a performance. Now, the gig economy has nothing to do with concert. The gig economy is this idea that you work for a short period of time in contracts which do not bind you, which do not force you to work for somebody forever. They are very precarious type of jobs. When I think about the gig economy, I'm thinking about Uber, Deliveroo. That's that type of companies where your work contracts are very flexible. Most of the time they are what we call 0-hour contract. Don't know if you've heard about this concept before. So your contract doesn't indicate the number of hours you're meant to work for an employer. So it might be 0 hour if your employer doesn't need you, but it might be more if they need extra staff. So it's very flexible on the one hand, but very precarious because you never know how much money you'll get in the month, since you don't know how many hours you will be working. That's what makes it very as I said, unstable, difficult to plan projects with. But what those companies have managed to claim is that this is a form of freedom, because basically flexibility means, in the capitalist world, flexibility means freedom. Companies are free to manage their staff as they please, and employers are free to work as they please. This is a very tweaked concept. To me, this is really a perversion of what freedom is, because this is not freedom as such, because I suppose that from the workers' perspective, this is not so much freedom, they have to do so. When you see people on their bikes delivering things and they don't even know where they're going, they're trying to read a map as they ride their bikes, and they have to as many deliveries as possible in an evening in order to make enough money for it to be worth it. I don't see how this compares to freedom, but apparently it is. So carrying on, that was a personal point of view, sorry. Workers commute further. You know about that word. Commute is going from your workplace to your home place. So workers commute further. So they have to go to work in more distant places because work is not necessarily around the place where they live. They strike less, which means, you understand, strike, stop working. So they strike less, they protest less than they used to. They retire later. To retire is to stop working officially. When your job is done, you're 60 and you retire. So see, these are the conditions of work now. You have to travel long distances to go to work. You do not protest as much as people used to, maybe in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And you stop working altogether at an older age than you do now. Right, you've heard about the pension straits that have been going on in France and in many other countries as well. Okay, so that doesn't seem like an improvement to me in advance, but this is the condition of work today. Digital technology lets work invade leisure. Interesting that we're talking about this because you have been discussing, for some of you, teleworking. We are teleworking or telecommuting, which means working on our computers all day. So technology has invaded our leisure time as well. We are constantly reminded of work. Your work emails are being mixed with your personal emails on your phone. So I'm just taking an example, but this idea that technology, instead of making our work lighter and easier and more comfortable, has added extra pressure and an extra charge on what we're doing. Right. Now, second paragraph, in all these mutually reinforcing ways, so all the ways we have just mentioned, work increasingly forms our routines and psyches, which means that all our routines, our daily lives, revolve around, so that's another word you could use, they revolve around work. You wake up in the morning and organize all your day around this one thing called work. And psyches, which means like even in our minds, everything we do, the way we function, the way we work, the way our brain works and processes everything we do is in order to work and achieve our work and realize it. Carrying it out. So squeezes out other influences. To squeeze out means it eliminates other influences. So if you're an artist, unfortunately, most of the time you still need to eat. So in order to do so, you need a proper job. So you see a lot of people working in dead-end jobs, doing so because they're trying to pay the bills, basically. We see this all the time. Well, it pays the bill. When you say that your job pays the bill, it's really negative. It means that all I'm doing is, I'm doing this for money, pretty much. I'm not doing this for fulfillment. You know, like when you get your dream job, sorry, 1L. When you get your dream job, usually you say you are fulfilled. You have your dream come true. But if your job is a daily grind that you go to work reluctantly and you don't really feel like you want to work in that job, in that position, that must be very difficult to wake up every morning to go to work and you don't like it. So as Joanna Briggs, and back here, put it in her quietly disturbing 2015 book, All Day Long, A Portrait of Britain at Work, work is how we give our lives meaning when religion, party politics and community fall away. I love this because it makes me think of a philosopher you will have to study next year. So that's an opportunity to introduce him to you. Next year you're meant to study Nietzsche. And not sure, there's a nest maybe somewhere, I'm not sure. Maybe here. Who knows? Complicated name to write. Nietzsche is a philosopher famous for having said, God is dead. He was appalled at how people always needed to believe in something. So he rejected all forms of conventions. He thought that we were completely formatted in society. We had been made to think a certain way. We had been conditioned into thinking in certain ways, especially by religion. Right? He hated Christianity. And when I see this sentence, to me, that's very reminiscent of this philosophy. Like, religion now has disappeared. Most society, well, not completely, entirely, but society is growing more and more secular, which means there's no religion. Party politics and community fall away. People are getting disinterested from politics at the moment. You can see they use politics in order to express protest and rejection and resentment, but they do not use politics in the way it's meant to be, which is really constructing a community, building schemes and projects. People just express their resentment. So community is falling away because there's a growth in individuality. So everything's falling apart. Right? And the only thing that holds it together, apparently, is work. This is the one thing that keeps all things together. So, after reading this first part in the text, what can we say? How can we try to encapsulate or to sum up these two first paragraphs in the answer to the previous question? Remember, the questions, how significant is work in today's society? Well, I've tried to sum it up by using a lot of synonyms. So I wanted to say it was basically the most important thing in everybody's society. So I use that word. It seems to be prevalent, keyword, ubiquitous, pervasive, which means that basically it invades everything, right? And has become the mainstay of many people's lives. Now, a mainstay, is a word we use which means basically a pillar, something that supports the whole structure, a buttress. You know, in cathedrals, when you see those roofs, very elaborate and intricate roofs, they are buttressed or they are supported by, they've got pillars. There's other words you could use for this. You say it's a linchpin. A linchpin, it's a cornerstone. There are so many words. This is typically one of those pre-engineering school vocabulary again that I mentioned earlier. A cornerstone, it's the backbone. I love this one. The backbone, what you've got in your back, basically that holds your whole body structure together. So you could say work has become the backbone of many people's lives. It's what all their lives rests upon, okay, or presses upon. People are made to believe, so once again, I've had fun with grammar because that's what I do. They are made to believe. I love this because it translates the idea that people are forced to believe. They are made to believe. Basically, it's as if we said, we make people believe. If I transform this into a sentence, so we make people believe. And because we want to remove we, say people, so I use my subject, and this, I don't know if you remember, is called a causative. We cause someone to do something, we make them believe, we make them do this, we make them do that, we make them believe. Now if you turn this into the passive form, people, passive is be plus past participles, people are made, but be careful, you need to reintroduce this too. People are made to believe. Okay, so just as a reminder for those who are a bit confused with this. People are made to believe achievement or success, that's another word for success, occurs through work. Occurs means happens. It happens through work. So success means that you work hard, and the fruit of this work results in your success. Now, I've suggested many different different words in order to replace the word work. So they labor, they toil, they exert, they task themselves into finding a substitute for religion or ideological guidelines. I don't know if you noticed what happens here. This is once again grammar. They work into finding a substitute. They work themselves. Okay. Remember that this structure is a resultative. I guess I'm going to write here. A bit messy, but it's a resultative, which means that the verb is explaining the means that they use. They work, okay? They work themselves so much that finally, in the end, eventually, the outcome of this is that they find a substitute for religion. They find a replacement for religion or ideological guidelines. Ideological guidelines is what I use to replace community in politics. Might not be the best, but that's what I thought could encapsulate, okay, and sum up and encompass what both those ideas were. So resultative, remember, the verb is the means used, then you get the subject, then you get the result. Okay, for example, sometimes I speak so much that I talk myself to sleep. Okay, I can fall asleep because I talk too much to myself, right, or to others as well. So let's moving on. Let's move on, sorry. So, list all the books quoted in the article and present them. The reason why I asked you this is because I was struck by the number of books that were referred to in this article, and also because I think this is a brand new idea, this idea that you don't need to work, and it comes from thinkers. So, forward-thinking people, maybe, you might say so. Forward-thinking people, or writers, if you want to be more precise, who have thought this up. They have devised this idea that we do not need to work, or maybe at least they have described the condition of work and they have tried to criticize it to show that it was not fulfilling for people. So the books are, actually there are 3 of them, in the number of 3. So the first one is All Day Long, A Portrait of Britain at Work, that has been referred to in the previous paragraphs, Joanna Biggs. So what I did is I included the blurb. The blurb is basically the summary that are given to publishers in order to sell the book. So if I quickly go through this, you will get more information about the type of content that this book contains. Okay, the average person spends 100,000 hours of their life at work, but how much do we really know about what we do with it? So this idea is that we work a lot, but we do not necessarily understand why. I don't know if you've watched the movie The Island. I think it's the director's Michael Bay. Not sure, but it might be. It's this a movie about clones, and at some point there's a famous scene. Maybe I'm gonna try to post it on Padlet, where a man is working, and he's got a tube that goes from here to here, and he's feeding the tubes with a syringe. And someone says, "Do you know where these tubes go?" I said, "Well, they go from here to here." Right, but the man doesn't realize that actually in the movie those tubes are feeding clones in a much bigger infrastructure that is located under the place where he works. And well, this is a totally different story, but this idea that sometimes you do things you do not really understand why you're doing them. Right. So carrying on, what is it really like to work in advertising, to be a train driver, sex worker, or an Orthodox rabbi? You can already feel the tone of the book, where they basically put in the same bag, it's a mixed bag, jobs such as advertising and sex workers. So the variety of jobs that will be presented range from very orthodox jobs to more out there jobs. Well, I call them out there jobs, a bit more unusual and unfamiliar jobs. What do we do in our working hours, and how does that color our life, beliefs and happiness, and what happens to how we feel about work in a recession? Now, interesting, this book was published recently. You know that we went through a recession in 2008. There was a massive financial crisis. You will probably remember this year as being a recession year as well. This is not difficult to predict. So yeah, when you work and it's a time of recession, usually you work for a very low pay or low wages, or at least unsatisfying amount of money or income. So what is the meaning to if you go to work every day but the money you get from it is not sufficient for you to live, for example? Okay, that's another question. So that was the first book mentioned. Now the second one was this one. From the very cover you understand in which direction this is going. This is a book by Peter Fleming called The Death of Homo economicus. They used the Latin term to make it sound as if it was a scientific term, like Homo economicus. So let's read the blurb and see what it contains. So, for neoclassical economists, Homo economicus, or economic human, represents the ideal employee, an energetic worker bee. You know, like when you're a bee, it means like usually we say to work like a beaver. But when you work like a bee, it's like you work all the time, okay? You're fidgeting around and you're doing a lot of things. You're full of energy. So an energetic worker bee that is rational yet competitive decision maker, right? So the perfect employee is someone who works a lot, who makes the right decisions, who is able to compete. Alternatively, one could view the concept as a cold and selfish workaholic, endlessly seeking the accumulation of money and advancement. It's interesting here because basically they provide two versions of reality. On the one hand, the perfect employee is apparently someone who gets down to work, he puts his shoulder to the wheel, he makes the right decisions, he's competitive, he makes decisions and stuff. Now, If you look at this same man from another perspective, you might say that this man is a workaholic. And I don't know if you've ever heard about this term. Usually, we talk about an alcoholic, someone who is addicted to alcohol. Now, recently, well, actually, not recently, over the last 10 years, we have talked about this concept of workaholic, someone who is addicted to work, who works all the time, so endlessly seeking, remember the word seek, looking for the accumulation of money and advancement. So someone who's interested in making money and professional advancement, like you move the professional ladder, someone who is ambitious. A chilling representation of capitalism. So from the start, you understand, once again, the position or the stance of this author, who will very probably, who is likely to criticize the system and say that we are made to work just in order to feed capitalism, but not for fulfillment, really. Or perhaps, as Peter Fleming argues, Homo economicus does not actually exist at all. So he's questioning this idea that we participate in this system, and that we are what we call an economic human. We might be something else than an economic item. Right. Last book has been very successful, but it's gone viral over the last few years on the net. It's called Bullshit Jobs, The Rise of Pointless Work and What We Can Do About It by David Graeber. This is the blurb. Does your job make a meaningful contribution to the world? So the question is like, is your job worth anything? Sorry, actually started wrong, so I need my eraser. Here you go. There you go. Is your job worth anything? Does what you do serve any purpose? In the spring of 2013, David Graeber asked this question in a playful, provocative essay, so that's the idea of the title, obviously, titled On the Phenomenon of Bullshit Jobs. It went viral. You understand the word viral, I suppose? It's like a virus. You hear a lot about this at the moment. It does the round, basically. Okay, it's very talked about. It's very popular. After 1 million online views in 17 different languages, people all over the world are still debating the answer. So this is an international success, which very sadly probably means that a lot of people around the world globally think that their jobs might be bullshit or BS. That's not the word you should be using. You should say it's useless or pointless. Pointless is the right word for bullshit. There are millions of people, HR consultants, human resources, HR, communication coordinators. We don't even know what that means. When you say, I'm a communication coordinator, what does that mean? Is that just that you send email? Right, nobody knows. Telemarketing researchers, corporate lawyers, whose jobs are useless and tragically, they know it. So sometimes people know that the job they're doing as a very bombastic term, I'm a communication coordinator, but at the end of the day it serves basically no purpose. So these people are caught in bullshit jobs. So this is a very provocative, very thought-provoking as well. It's a thought-provoking book, which means it makes you think. You're like, is what I'm doing really useful? Right? So moving on. I wanted to, just in one sentence, try to find the common point between those books. So they all indicate a shift towards a change in the workplace and a denunciation of the labour market as it is. As you can see, all these previous books that have been mentioned are very critical of the workplace. So they tend to really look down on the present situation on the workplace. Next question, what are the downsides of work? Because this article was listing, with many reasons, a list of a list of the reasons why jobs or work in general has a lot of disadvantages. So let's go through this. The first idea, as a source of subsistence, let alone, I love this one, let alone prosperity. Even less prosperity. Work is now insufficient for all social classes. It's not enough. In the UK, almost 2/3 of those in poverty, around 8 million people, no S, remember, because there's a number in front of it, are in working households. In the US, the average wage, has stagnated for half a century. This is what we mentioned earlier, this idea of the working poor. A dramatic situation, because it means you're working, but the wage you get in return for your work is not enough to cover your rent, to cover your food expenses or your living expenses. So that's the tragedy. Is we have been made to understand that we work to live, or we work for a living, but sometimes when you work, it's not enough to make ends meet. Means to be able to have money that covers the whole month, for example. Okay. So first situation, you work, but you don't get enough money from your work. Sorry, that's a terrible one that I've just drawn on that document. Second reason why there are downsides. As a source of social mobility and self-worth, remember we talked about this, the possibility of climbing the social ladder? Self-worth is how you look at yourself, how you consider yourself. What am I worth? Okay, it's the value you give yourself. So I would maybe call this gratification. So as a source of social mobility and self-worth, work increasingly fails even the most educated people, supposedly the system's winners. So when you're educated, you're supposed to be at the top of that social ladder. Remember what we have already mentioned at the beginning of the year. Now, apparently, it fails to do so. Even when you're educated, it doesn't bring you any gratification, or it doesn't necessarily mean that you're climbing the social ladder. In 2017, where am I? Here. In 2017, half of recent UK graduates were officially classified as working in a non-graduate role, which means that you spend 5 years paying extortionate fees at university to finally get a degree, and then at the end you end up working in a position. A position is a job, okay? In a position that doesn't require a degree. So you spent 5 years at university. Well, that's nice because you educated yourself, you instructed yourself, but at the end of the day, you could have skipped it and went to work and gone to work, okay, straight away. In the US, belief in work is crumbling among people in their 20s and 30s, says Benjamin Hunnicutt, a leading historian of work, which means that people in their 20s or 30s, people who are 20 years old or 30 years old, do not believe that work is the ultimate purpose, okay? Belief in work is crumbling. To crumbling means it's collapsing. To collapse. Their dreams are being shattered. To shatter a dream or a hope, most of the time, you destroy it, basically. They are not looking to their job for satisfaction or social advancement. So they go to work, but it's neither for social mobility nor for self-worth. See what I've used here? Neither, nor, because I'm rejecting both. So this is not bringing you what it's supposed to bring you. It's not fulfilling you the way it's supposed to fulfill you. And now you can really feel the irony, and that's what I prefer the most when I read an article, the irony of the journalists. I will highlight this because I find it very funny. Actually, I'm going to use my yellow highlight. There you go. This sentence is hilarious, I find it. You can sense this every time a graduate with a faraway look makes you a latte. So I don't know if you get this image. Let's say you go to Starbucks. I'm going to take a very stereotypical image. And the person serving you at the till is a young person who seems not to be very content or satisfied to be here. While they are preparing you a latte, they're giving you a cup of coffee, but actually they may have studied 5 years at university and they were probably expecting to do something else. But unfortunately, they couldn't find a job or they couldn't find work, so they ended up doing what? Is being a waiter or waitress in a cafe or in a coffee shop, which is, I'm not passing judgment. It's perfectly honourable work and job. But all I'm saying is that if you study so much and you invest so much of your money in your studies, it's a bit of a shame that all you're doing is serving cups of coffee, right? So the journalist is trying to show he's very ironical here. Now the third reason. The third reason why jobs or work in general is considered as a downside or has a disadvantage is this. Work is increasingly precarious. That's the precarious, unstable. So more 0 hours or short-term contracts, more self-employed people with erratic incomes, more corporate restructurings for those were still with actual jobs. We have already discussed the 0 hours or the short-term contracts, okay? Erratic income, erratic means that they're very irregular wages. That's what we've discussed earlier with Uber and Deliveroo and the gig economy. Companies are restructuring. That's a nice word to explain that they are basically laying off people. To lay people off means like you fire them, basically. You make them redundant. To make people redundant. As a source of sustainable consumer booms and mass home ownership, for much of the 20th century, the main successes of mainstream Western economic policy, work is discredited daily by our ongoing debt and housing crisis. For many people, not just the very wealthy, work has become less important financially than inheriting money or owning a home. It basically means that it's what your parents pass on to you that is actually what makes you rich. It's not work. Work should be the source of your social climbing, of your social evolution and progress. If you work hard, you can gain access to property, you can gain access to all the privileges that you're meant to reach and to get access to. Now, apparently work is not what makes you rich anymore. It's the money that you are being passed on or like given as a legacy by your parents, bequeathed by your parents, or it's owning a home, like the property you are given by someone, or the property you own actually is worth more than the wages you make from work. So work is losing its value in terms of money, its financial value. Right. Next reason why work is a demon. Unsurprisingly, work is increasingly regarded as bad for your health. I'm sorry about the being underlined here. I couldn't remove it because I'm so stupid. I couldn't find the way to remove the hyperlink, so do not think that I did it on purpose. So it's bad for your health. Stress, an overwhelming to-do list, and long hours sitting at a desk. At a desk. The Cass Business School professor Peter Fleming notes in his new book, The Death of Homo economicus, are beginning to be seen by medical authorities as akin to smoking. Remember this word we've already seen? It's similar. It's similar to smoking. Apparently, working is as serious as smoking. So, if you go to work, there should be a board on the door saying, well, working kills. Maybe there's something that we should be warned about. So apparently the fact that we are under the pressure, the constant pressure of work is making us so stressed. And this is the 20th, 21st century main disease, really. We have so much to do on our to-do list, and we stay sitting at our desk all day long, and you know about this right now, that it makes us sick, okay? It's really damaging for our health. Well, that's a very strong reason, I think. Moving on, so that's the fifth reason. We're almost there. Work is badly distributed. What does that mean? Well, explanation here. People have too much or too little, or both in the same month. So remember this flexibility we mentioned in the work contract? Sometimes you could do more, but your employer doesn't give you as much as you wish you had to work with. And sometimes you have too much. You can never adjust your own time, your own pace to work. It's work imposing its pace upon you. Right? Basically, it's work stronger than you. And your timetable. It should be the other way around, right? And away from our predictable or consuming workplaces, and this is to me a very relevant sentence. That would be one sentence I kept from this article. That would be this one. Vital human activities are increasingly neglected. Workers lack the time or energy to raise children attentively or to look after elderly relations. Now, this is a fundamental point in this article to me anyway, because it means that because we're so focused and concentrated on work all the time, we tend to forget or foresee is another word you could use, or disregard our relatives. A lot of parents are working now, a lot, and they fail to look after their kids or to take the time to educate them or read them a bedtime story or spend time in the park with them. I know it's a bit of a cliche because many parents do this, but still, it has become more difficult than before. I'm not sure my grandparents spent a lot of time with their children, to be honest, but at least they were close. But now parents are in the workplace, they're, for example, in their office while their children are at home. So it's like there's even a geographical divide between parents and children. Or the elderly usually are relegated to care homes. Nobody looks after them because work is all the time. No, sorry, grandma, I can't come and see you on Sunday because I've got work, I've got homework. But this has replaced those vital human activities. What is the most important? And I think the current virus, the current crisis is reminding us of the importance of those vital, essential things, that there are priorities in life and it's not necessarily the economic purpose of making money and having the country running and work, right? It's arguable once again, but I tend to share the idea really, even though you don't care about my opinion, but do share this idea with the journalist. Now the last paragraph. And finally, beyond all these dysfunctions, so see, he sums up everything we've discussed earlier as a dysfunction. Loom to loom is when something threatening is coming up, is emerging. Loom the most discussed, most existential threats to work. So very negative terms, as you can see, dysfunction, threats, as we know it. Automation. And we finally reach the stage where we come back to this idea that we will be replaced by machines. And the state of the environment. That's interesting. So let's read into this because the journalist will probably explain what he means. Some recent estimates suggest that between a third and a half of all jobs could be taken over, remember this term, surpassed, by artificial intelligence in the next 2 decades. Other forecasters doubt whether work can be sustained in its current toxic form. So when I said that there were a lot of negative terms, I'm not lying, on a warming planet. Yes, on the one hand you get machines, which are jeopardizing. Remember this term, to jeopardize? I'm writing all over the screen to check if you're paying attention. So on the one hand, you get machines threatening or jeopardizing our work, but on the other hand, you do have a warming planet that will make it difficult for us to keep running the way we do, to keep working the way we do. So work will have to be different in the future because we will go through cataclysmic times, and I'm not a doomsayer when I say this. It's just that the pandemic is a reminder once again of what may happen, and suddenly the whole system goes down the pipe. So the fact that the planet is warming, that there's an environmental threat at the moment, might make our jobs insecure in the future. So there were a lot of elements. So remember what I told you a long time ago. When you get a list of ideas, you do have 6 ideas here. You can use not only. You can use first, second, third. You can also use third strategy. They range from this to this to this to this. But when you get 6 of them, that's quite a lot. So the strategy I used is this one. Let's use the highlighter just to make sure you see things. So among the various work-induced disadvantage, so I have formed an adjective to explain that the disadvantage are induced, or they are caused by work. So among the various work-induced disadvantage alluded to in the article, which means mentioned, this is just another word for mentioned in the article, are how insufficient wages have become. I'm going to stop here just to show you the structure of this sentence. When you start with something that locates what you're talking about. You could say, in the woods, in the woods is the house. You could say this, in the woods is the house. When you start with such a phrase, in this, in that, on that, or among the various, you can then continue the sentence with are. Okay, among the various are, and then you continue your sentence. I don't know if I'm being clear here. How insufficient wages have become, be very careful here. I'm drawing your attention to this. How is always followed by the adjective first. In French, you would say how wages have become insufficient. So you would have this first, then you would have this one, then this one, and then insufficient at the end. But in English, you have to use how. You place the adjective straight away, and then you continue with your subject and your verb. So be very careful with this. You could say, this is how important this work is. You don't say how. I'm not going to be able to do this. How work is important. Yes, that's how French people would say this. In English, you would say how important your job is. So, among the various work-induced disadvantages alluded to in the article are how insufficient wages have become, therefore paving the way for the emergence of the working poor, but also how precarious. So I've tried to give you a lot of synonyms, so you've got a lot of vocabulary to learn. Precarious, unstable, insecure, and poorly or inadequately allotted jobs, which means the jobs that you are given are not well distributed. I don't know if you can already recognize the ideas that we have been discussing. So when we talked in the first part about the working poor and how it was very unstable, okay, I think it was here, that it was irregular, and that's what I tried to express here when I said that they were precarious, unstable, and insecure. Okay, and when I said that they were badly distributed, for example, too much or too little. See here, I've transformed this with poorly or inadequately allotted jobs. Okay, are in the current labor market. So I'm continuing here. What with the rise? What with is interesting. It's a phrase we use to say, well, you know when people say, oh, well, there's this, and then there's this, when you think about this, and this, and this, and this, we can just say what with. What with, first, the rise of the gig economy and flexible work contracts. Workers now end up neglecting some essential chores. Chores means like, it's a task, a very unpleasant task most of the time that you have to carry out. So they're neglecting some essential chores such as looking after their children or elderly relatives. So already you can see that I have already managed to introduce quite a number of ideas. The idea that the money was not enough, the idea that it was precarious, that it was not well distributed, that it was too flexible, that they were neglecting their relatives. And because it was not finished, I added an extra paragraph saying, additionally, remember, link words are always important, they cannot expect any form of social mobility as home ownership and their social background often take precedence over work itself. Okay? So there's no social mobility, and only home ownership and social background are more important than their work. Thus, so as a result, see, I love doing this. Usually when I introduce the consequence in the same sentence, I just place a comma and I add therefore. And I did the same here. Comma, thus, it's the same thing. Discrediting it. We discredit work. If work is not bringing you the money you're expecting from it, then it's discredited, it's worthless. And because I wanted to add a negative idea, I used, nor can they hope that automation and global warming do not affect the future of their jobs. So I've got all the ideas, but I rephrased them in my own fashion. Right? So I love this nor can they hope. When you add something, for example, I do not want to work. Okay, and I want to say that I don't want to to waste my time. Okay, I want to add 2 negative ideas. First, I don't want to work, and I don't want to waste my time. What I can do to relate those 2 sentences, like I say, I do not want to work, nor, and your sentence is, I do not want to waste my time. But in order not to repeat this, you will not repeat want, you will say nor, and you use the auxiliary first. Nor do I, actually you can reuse want, I'm sorry, you have to reuse it, that's stupid. Nor do I want to waste my time. Okay, so you have an inversion that happens here. Okay, you get your nor, you get your auxiliary, the subject, and then you continue. Right, moving on, because I'm taking so much time. What paradox does this underline? So, there is a paradox, certainly. The article started telling you that work is the mainstay, it's the pillar of all our lives. Yet on the other hand, so you get like work is all embracing, it's work is like the most important thing in life, versus a list of 6 disadvantages, among which is your health. It makes you sick. Yeah? Apparently it's very negative. So why is work so important when at the end of the day it has so many disadvantages or downsides? So the paradox I've summed up with 2 quotes from the text, simply 2 of them. The first one, remember, we said we give our lives meaning when religion, party politics, and community, fall away. So to me, I hark back to this sentence because I think this is very telling. There's the paradox. We want to get rid of work, but at the same we want to get rid of like a form of conditioning, of pressure, but we replace one pressure with another. We replace like the frameworks in which we work by another. So we need to fill our lives with something and give it meaning. And because meaning has disappeared, because religion is not here anymore, because politics is becoming really polarized and maybe people are not interested anymore, or community doesn't exist anymore so much as people are very individualistic, then you look for meaning in your life, and the only one that gives you meaning is work. Okay? Now, the second quotation is this sentence that appeared in the text later. And yet, work is not working. Well, that's not the best pun in the world, to be honest. The journalist tried maybe a play on word that is not very funny. Work is not working as the evidence of its failures is all around us. That's the paradox, okay? It's work is central and it gives meaning to our lives, and yet at the same time, it's failing us. It's bringing us misery, apparently. How did I sum that up? I sum that up that way. So there's a paradox. Paradox means there's a contradiction. Contradiction means I can use a concession. And here I went very simple, very soft. I said despite. Despite the multifarious drawbacks of works, this is very bombastic. A lot of people make fun of me because I use that word. Multifarious means the various or the different drawbacks. But because I want to sound very highbrow, I use multifarious. So despite the multifarious drawbacks of work, most people still place it, there's a word missing. Most people still place it at the heart of their lives, making everything revolve around it and turning it into the objective of their existence. That's where the paradox lays. Or actually lies. Okay, right. So moving on. What are the consequences of work centrality? So you understand this word? Work centrality is when you make work central to your life. Once again, I've just relied on 2 parts in the text in order to answer this question. They're not looking to their job for satisfaction or social advancement. So remember what we said, no gratification from work and no social advancement either. You cannot climb the social ladder anymore, even though you work hard or however hard you may work. I love this. However hard you may work. Okay? The second quote is, vital human activities are increasingly neglected. Remember what we said, workers lack the time or energy to raise children attentively, to look after elderly relations. So bearing in mind those two ideas, the consequences of work centrality, it doesn't bring you satisfaction and you forget the people around you. So how did I sum that up? I said, work prevalence is domination. Okay, so work domination or work prevalence results in overlooking or disregarding, which means you do not pay attention to what matters most, such as family relations, or again, engaging workers in a rat race that will not fulfill their professional ambition nor well-being. Few things here. So I suppose you have no problem understanding this until here. Or again is the translation of ou encore this or this or that, or again, right. We engage workers in a rat race. I love this term. A rat race is a race in which you cannot win. Like everybody, you're like a rat spinning in a wheel, or like a hamster or guinea pig spinning in a wheel. It never stops, but you can never win. I don't know, it's a very stupid thing to have animals do. Like they keep running around the wheel, but obviously it's a wheel, so it goes nowhere. It's a bit pointless. So it's a rat race. We make people compete, but for nothing. Because it doesn't bring them the money, the satisfaction, the stability. So they are made to think. They are made to think that when they compete, they can finish first. But there's no winning in this race, okay? Because ultimately they're just doing so to feed the capitalist system, according to the journalist, and they are just illusioned in the idea that they are deceived or they are tricked into believing, if you want to use a resultative, they are tricked into believing that they can win. Okay, so it doesn't fulfill their professional ambition since the social ladder cannot be climbed, and it affects their health as well. So because there were two negative things, I said they will not. So my verb is in the negative. Okay, they will not fulfill. That will not fulfill, nor. So neither their professional ambition nor their well-being. But when we start with a negative verb, you don't need to say they will not fulfill neither this nor that. It's too many not, neither, nor. You just say it will not fulfill nor this when you want to add a negative idea. Moving on. What is post-workism? So this is the key to this article. We have been exposed to the reasons why work is evil. It's been demonized in this article so far. Now, new concept, post-workism. Let's have a look. So since the early 2010s, as the crisis, so I'm going to take my pen, as the crisis of work has become increasingly unavoidable in the US and the UK, these heretical ideas, when you're a heretic, it means like you are going against the grain. To go against the grain, which means you are going against the mainstream ideas. It's heretical. People used to be burnt for this. So these heretical ideas have been rediscovered and developed further. An anti-work movement has taken shape, and it's called workism. Some even call it post-work. You know these post things, you know about post-structuralism, post-modernism, which means that you use something but you push it even further than it was. At the moment, we talk about post-truth, for example, with misinformation and fake news. Talk about post-truth. Can we achieve truth? Apparently we can't. So post-truth is this idea that you need to cross-reference your sources in order to reach something that looks like the truth, but that is not really the truth. I don't know if I'm being clear here. Have a look at all these concepts that I'm dropping here and there because that might be useful. These are things that we come across a lot in the press. So post-work means like what happens after work has died. You know, I could possibly quote Nietzsche here and say God is dead, but not God, but work. Work is dead. What comes next? Let's have a look. For some of the post-work writers, this future must include a universal basic income. And please, please, please make a note of this. The UBI is a very, very important concept, guys. And I'm going to highlight it so much that it will disappear from the screen. The UBI will be explained in the following lines. It's basically a universal income that you give everybody in return for nothing. It's not means tested. To be means tested means that when you give money to somebody, you check how many children they have or in which type of house they live, how much money they earn. Now, a UBI or universal basic income is this idea that the state would give everyone money every month in exchange for nothing, in return for nothing. And it would not be means tested. So even if you have already quite a lot of money, you would be given this allowance from the state. We might discuss this a bit further in the year. It's a fascinating subject, extremely, extremely fashionable. Everybody keeps talking about this. More and more politicians drop this in their speeches. So let's try to focus on this. Make a note of this concept, the UBI. So obviously, in a post-work world, people would need money. If they don't work, they will not get the money. However precarious the money might be sometimes, it's still money. Now, if you don't work, you don't get any, so you need a universal basic income. Currently, post-work's most high-profile and controversial idea, it is very controversial. Paid by the state to every working age person so that they can survive when the great automation comes. So basically, what the journalist is saying is that we owe people, we must give them this money. We owe people money because machines will replace them. We are doing everything we can to develop automation and machine and technology. And the result is that people do not have a choice. They are being stolen of their jobs without their wanting it. So as a form of compensation, the least the state can do is give them money since they are taking jobs away from them, right? So that's the idea anyway that the journalist is putting forward. For others, so see, for others, so we get different opinions, the debate around the affordability and morality of a UBI is a distraction from even bigger issues. So for some people, this is not very relevant. This idea of giving money to everybody is not very important. Right? People say we shouldn't even think about how affordable, which means how inexpensive or expensive that is, or if it's moral or immoral to give everybody money. This is not even the question. We're beyond this. The question is, how do we implement post-work? How do we make a world without jobs, without work? And the question of how to afford it, how to pay for it, and how moral that is just not interesting. It's not even the question. So I'd say that this is a very easy way out. If you do not explain how you pay for it or you provide for this, well, it might limit the success of such a philosophy. Moving on to this paragraph. Post-work may be a rather grey and academic sounding phrase, which means it sounds very bombastic, very obscure maybe. Maybe actually when he says academic sounded, it means it's very obscure. Post-work, it sounds like all these, as I mentioned earlier, all these concepts of post-structuralism and post-modernism. That sounds very university-like, okay? Things we talk about at university. But it offers enormous alluring promises. Alluring means attractive, okay? Attractive, alluring. Try to learn all these synonyms, by the way. Okay? They will save you a lot of time. That life with much less work or no work at all would be, and look at all these repetitions of comparatives, calmer, more equal, more communal, more pleasurable, more thoughtful, more politically engaged, more fulfilled, in short. So if I want to sum up everything I say, in short, or in a word, or in a nutshell, that much of human experience would be transformed. So the very interesting idea is that if we stop talking about how to pay for it or how moral that is, not working would make our life experience completely different. And these are all the advantages
that it would bring us. So it's going to be difficult to sum up this. So I'm going to show you what I did in order to later on in the text to sum up these ideas. So if we want to explain what post-workism is, apparently it's something that will necessitate paying people. It's something that will bring us a different life experience. Post-workism, if I try to sum it up, is this. It's an anti-work concept. Claiming means to declare. To claim something is to say something, basically. Instead of saying, which is very commonplace, very flat saying, you can say claiming. So anti-work concept, claiming that there is currently a flurry of alternatives. A flurry is a word that means a variety. You could say an array as well. A flurry, a range. All these words means a flurry of alternatives, which demonstrate the uselessness or obsolescence of work. Okay, there are ways, such as the UBI, such as making our lives better. There are many alternatives that show that actually work is useless and obsolete. This is an old idea that should disappear. It argues, this is the same word, okay, I've just used synonyms. It argues that a work-free world, see, I'm trying to do this a lot in my papers, and I know some of you are getting used to this as well. But instead of saying it's a world where you don't have to work, where work is, you can say a work-free world. Work-free work. No, work-free world. And an adjective is always much better, it's much lighter, it's more stylish. Okay, that a work-free world does exist and is sustainable. I'm going to stop here just to explain this does that some of you recognize. We do not need it in this sentence. We should say a world exists, that the world exists and is sustainable. Okay? Now, what I did is I removed this S that I will place on the auxiliary does. I want to emphasize and insist that unlike what you think, contrary to what everybody believes, it is possible and it exists really. It really exists. That's as if I said this, okay? It really exists. And what I do is I use the do of emphasis. Remember the example I may have given you if a couple is having an argument and the man says, or the woman says, you do not love me. And the man wants to convince her that yes, he loves her. He will say, I do love you. Because you do not believe me, but I do love you. Okay, you're trying to convince someone of something. Okay, so a work-free world exists, really, it does, and is sustainable, which means that it can last in the long run. Okay, it's not just a short-lived experiment. It's not a short-lived, it can be long-lasting. Okay, that's the opposite. Right, moving on. Next question. What are its various arguments? Yes, of course. If you propose something like post-workism, you need to justify how or what this will bring you, because it's quite a revolutionary idea. So let's go through this. One of post-work's best arguments is that contrary to conventional wisdom, so once again, the journalist keeps repeating that this is not a conventional idea. This is not a mainstream idea to offer not to work. The work ideology is neither natural nor very old. So that's an interesting idea. Apparently working is unnatural. It's something that animals are not doing. Well, you might argue that when they go and feed themselves and hunt animals to feed themselves, it's work, right? So it's natural. But apparently, according to the journalist, is neither natural nor very old. Look at the justification he gives. Work as we know it is a recent construct. It's very recent, and he will give you the history of how we came to consider work as important. Like most historians, he identifies the main building blocks of our work culture as 16th century Protestantism, which saw effortful labor as leading to a good afterlife. See, Christianity states that if you work hard, you labor in your life, you sacrifice your life to work, you will gain access to paradise, to heaven. right? So this is a very 16th century idea, which was relaunched in the 19th century industrial capitalism, which required disciplined workers and driven entrepreneurs. We made people believe that working was essential to earn a living and to live. This is what we discussed earlier. This idea that a good employee is someone that works, or someone who works all the time, who places work at the heart of its work, of its life, his or her life. It's capitalism. It's the 19th century industrial revolution. And then the last step is the 20th century, desires for consumer goods and self-fulfillment. Very perverse idea, very vicious idea. This idea that the more you work, the more money you get, the more money you get, the more you can consume. And you know this, today you're not only a worker, you're a consumer. The reason why you want money is not necessarily because you want to move socially up, or that because you want to fulfill your life. It's because you want to consume. And that's why there was a rise in wages in the middle of the century. It's not because companies or bosses or corporations were nice to people. It's because they thought, if we give them more money, they will buy more stuff. And if they buy more stuff, it's more money for us. So it's an investment. Can you see the kind of circle that is? Very interesting idea, this one. Moving on. Graeber, remember Bullshit Jobs, the author? Yeah. Graeber, an American anthropologist and author of Bullshit Jobs theory, argues that in a less labor-intensive society, our capacity for things other than work could be built up again. We have apparently a capacity... Oops. There you go. A capacity for other things than work. What other things could we be doing than working? I don't know what you do in your spare time, but you dedicate your time to things which are apparently unrelated to work. What are those? We will be given an example, and that's an interesting idea because at the moment people are self-isolating, they're in lockdown, they're using their spare time doing what? And most of the time you will see that it has to do with art, and that's why I gave you a topic on art, artistic, creative activities. But let's move on. People will come up with stuff to do if you give them enough time. Personal anecdote from the journalist Graeber, the author, Graeber. Okay, so he will tell you, he will give you a personal experience to explain what people do when they don't work. We might be very critical of this example, but we'll come back to this. I lived in a village in Madagascar once. There was this intricate sociability. People would hang around in cafes, gossiping, having affairs, using magic. It was a very complex drama, the kind that can only develop when you have enough time. They certainly weren't bored. So, why do I say it's controversial? Because this idea that because it's Madagascar, they use magic, I don't like this too much. That's very a colonial idea. But anyway, so what people do apparently, they socialize. Once again, we might debate whether this is a good thing or not. Socializing seems to be, here, a very positive thing. But gossiping and having affairs, you might disagree with this and say, well, if people have more time, they cheat on their wives and they start talking about one another. Is that a positive step? According to Graeber, yes. According to your own morality, it might not be so. So, really arguable. In Western countries, I continue, in Western countries too, he argues, the absence of work would produce a richer culture. Just for those who struggle with verb tenses, we use would because we are projecting ourselves in an imaginary world. So we imagine that if there was no work, we would have a richer culture. So what kind of richer culture would we develop? The post-war years, when people worked less and it was easier to be on the dole means unemployed, jobless. It's a colloquial term, so it means you don't have a job, but be careful when you say on the dole, it means like it's not a very high standard register. Okay. So apparently after the war, a lot of people were jobless. They produced beat poetry, avant-garde theatre, a 50-minute drum solos, all Britain's great pop music, art forms that take time to produce and consume. So apparently, the more time you get, the more art you may produce. The best art was produced when people suddenly eased on their schedule and had time to craft and devise this art. Interesting idea, don't you think? Right, moving on. Town and city centres today are arranged for work and consumption. Work, co-conspirator. I like this idea that work is related to consumption. That's precisely what I explained earlier. If you work, you can consume. If you work, you get money. So if you get money, you can consume. That's this idea. So the two work hand in hand, really. Okay, they are working together, and very little else. So apparently, all the towns and all the cities are organized around this idea that you use the city. Remember, and this is a reference to our previous chapter, to go to work or to consume. You go to work or you go shopping when you go to in a city. Okay, now this is one of the reasons of post-work world is so hard to imagine. Adapting office blocks and other workplaces for other purposes would be a huge task, which the post-workists have only just begun to think about. So what they want to do is they want to replace the office blocks, you know, the places where people work in offices, for other things than work. So what do you do with a lot of workspaces if you do not use them for work? Well, this is what he suggests, or they suggest. One common proposal is for a new type of public building, usually envisaged as a well-equipped combination of library, leisure centre, artist studio. It could have social, care spaces, equipment for programming, making videos and music, record decks. It would be way beyond a community centre, which can be quite depressing. Current community centres are very boring sometimes. They would like to create vibrant, artistic, intellectual places or cultural places. This is very idealistic, very utopian. So all the world would be doing is read and produce music, and a lot of you will love this, programming, making videos, music, and that sounds like a very enticing world. It looks like a very attractive or alluring, remember what we said, alluring world, in which all you would be doing all day is just create things, right? So how did I manage to sum up those ideas? Because there were several of them, I used my old friend Not Only, so that's why there's this inversion here. Not only does it advocate, I'm talking about post-workism, so it is post-workism. Not only does it advocate for the implementation of the UBI, so that workers might not suffer from the loss of their jobs to automations. Be careful here, the preposition, you lose your job to something. If you want to say that you lose your job because of something, you say, I lost my job to restructuring, for example. So first idea, UBI. Second idea, but it contends is another word, it says. Okay, remember we have already seen the word to claim, to argue, to contend. That's already 3 verbs that you can try to vary so far. It contends that it would open up a world of new opportunities for human experience. That's how I summed up this idea that our life would be richer, more vibrant and more cultural. To name but a few, I love this phrase. Try to remember this. When you want to list a series of examples, but you want to mention just a few of them, you can say, to name but a few. Okay, as if you said, if I want to mention just a few, right? It's the same thing, but we have this phrase in English that we can use. So to name but a few, it would make people more community-centered. Okay, remember what I said? Like this sense of community he talked about in Madagascar, more collective, more considerate, more attentive, so people pay attention to one another. And it would arouse means it would start a civic conscience among citizens. So we would start paying attention to one another. We would start paying attention to other members of society. It would arouse a civic conscience. Furthermore, link word because I want to add something. Its emotional benefits would range, and remember this is another way to list things, is to use range from to, okay? So it would range from, it would range from a more enjoyable or gratifying, same word, a more peaceful, serene, an accomplished life, to, so range from to, a fairer society. Remember that in the previous paragraphs, we had this, I'm going to try to go back. We were given this paragraph here. They talked about calm, equality, community, pleasure, thoughtful is when you think, politically engaged, fulfilled, which means that your life is worth living. Well, I've tried to use all these words to replace them. So when I said life was pleasant, say it was enjoyable or gratifying. When I said life was calm, I said it was peaceful or serene. When I said that life was fulfilling, I said it was accomplished. That it was just or equal, I said fair. So I always try to play with my synonyms, and that's gonna have to be your job now. You're gonna have to spend, well, your work rather than job. You're gonna have to spend time really listing synonyms. And the best thing, and I've advised this to a lot of students already, is to use things like I'm not sure about the website, to be honest. I'm not going to write the website, but try to use, you can just type online thesaurus. A thesaurus, I've already mentioned this, is a dictionary of synonyms. It's really cool, right? Because it gives you all the words you can use. Obviously, you need to have a bit of, you need to step back, okay? And to make sure you choose the right synonyms. So there's one, I'm going to give you the reference, okay? Very soon. You can ask me for the reference, I can give you. There's one online, which it's orange tainted. It's an orange page in which they give you various pages, okay? For each definition. So if you say good, it can mean many different things. So they give you synonyms for good when it means this, good when it means that, good when. So you can use a thesaurus. It's very, very useful. What I do most of the time is I type the word I'm looking for, and then I write synonym on Google, and then it gives me a list of synonyms, and I try to pick and choose among those synonyms. Okay, so it's really, really something you have to spend time doing. The more words, the better. Okay? The more tools at your disposition. Moving on, why is it a difficult idea to accept? Why are people unwilling or reluctant to implement this form of world without work? Well, this paragraph will tell you more about this. Now that work is so ubiquitous and dominant, ubiquitous, remember, it's another word for it's everywhere. Don't use the word everywhere. Don't say work is more and more present. This is typical of students. Work is more and more present. I'm not saying it's incorrect, but it's much better to say it's ubiquitous and dominant. Will today's post-workists succeed where all their other predecessors did not? That's true that this is a very utopian idea. I don't know if you've ever heard any utopias. Most of the time they turn into dystopias, by the way. There's one by William Morris called Back to Nowhere, I think. This idea that in many utopias, work is seen as something that is a burden, but yet at the same time, you see that work is considered as necessary to turn over the activities in societies like growing vegetables. You still need to feed yourself and stuff like this. So in those utopias, it's interesting because it's a mix of not working and at the same time imposing chores upon the community. So, well, you can have a look into this, like if you've got a bit of time, like Google it up or have a look at utopias and how they consider work. That's an interesting topic. Every time you've got time to dig a bit further, to go further in the subject, do, okay? It feeds more ideas for your presentation. So, back to the text. In Britain, possibly the sharpest outside judge of the movement is Frederick Harry Pitts, a lecturer in management at Bristol University. He's a sharp judge, which means that he's a very critical person as regards this subject. Pitts argues that post-work optimistic visions can be a way of avoiding questions about power in the world. What does that mean? He will explain. A post-work society is it's supposed to. Okay, to be meant to is to be supposed to. To resolve conflicts between different economic interest groups, that's part of its appeal. He told me. So, tired of the never-ending task of making work better, some socialists have latched on to post-work, he argues, in the hope that exploitation can finally be ended by getting rid of work altogether. Interesting ideas. He says that there is basically conflict in society, okay? And that it creates a dynamic between the oppressed and the oppressor, between the master and the slave, between the workers and the bosses, okay? So this form of tension, of dynamic, is necessary, okay? There's an appeal to this. And he says that the problem with post-work is if you remove work in the first place, then there will be no conflict anymore. And he says that's as if you were admitting that the struggle is over, that you can never get the upper hand, you can never win in this conflict. Let's say you are a worker, you can never win against your managers or your employers. So in order to win, the best thing is to completely eliminate work. As if, there was a boxing match and, A is fighting B, and there is this idea that maybe A will have the upper hand, maybe A will do, maybe B. Well, you remove the match altogether, so nobody wins, but nobody loses either. And that's what he doesn't like. He said, basically, there's no hope anymore that exploitation can be ended, because what you do is you stop work, so there's no exploitation anymore. So it means that exploitation will always win. And in order to eliminate exploitation, you eliminate work altogether. You do not keep on fighting. You just eliminate the problem. When you've got a problem, you have to fight for it. If you decide not to fight and you say, well, there's no problem anymore, okay, I'm going to consider this is not a problem anymore, then you do not fight for it. So, well, it's a very philosophical idea. I don't know if you get this. So he considered this is defeatist and naive, because struggles between economic interest groups can't ever be entirely resolved. And at this time, I think it's easier for you to understand. It's like, even in a society in which work has been completely got rid of, there will still be conflicts between groups. It's as in all utopias turning into dystopias, you can see there is always power struggle. I could give you this as an essay because I find this question fascinating. The question of the power struggle. Could we live in a society in which there is no power struggle? Every single day, from the moment you wake up, from the moment you talk to your parents, or to talk to your friends, to your teachers, to yourself, there is a power struggle. Who is the master? Who is the slave? Interesting question. But at the moment, all I'm going to do is answer the question that was asked. And the question was, there you go. So can I, oops, sorry. Made a mistake. There you go. The question is, according to them, so why is it difficult to accept? According to some who are dismissive of post-workism, this concept is flawed in two ways. Okay, I don't know why there you go. Is flawed, which means it has shortcomings. Okay, to be flawed means like it has defaults. For two reasons. First, it shuns or eschews, it basically avoids. Okay, that's the same thing as avoid. It avoids the question of the power struggle that takes place in society. This interpretation is Marxist, yes. I don't want to get into the details. If you're interested, I'll let you Google that up. I would be more than happy to explain, but I need to go a bit faster. Marxism is this idea that there's a fight between social classes, okay? And this fight is at the heart of society in capitalism. So when there's no fight anymore, no struggle, it means that you have basically given up. So it's a very Marxist interpretation. So first, the question of power is eliminated. It is necessary to improve the lot of workers. The lot here means the conditions. The conditions. On top of this, some adding ideas. It admits, or it acknowledges, that's another word, see synonyms, it admits, it acknowledges, be careful, pronunciation of the K, acknowledges that the labour conditions cannot be improved and therefore rushes for the next best thing. Annihilating, be careful pronunciation, you understand, destroying, annihilating work altogether, not to recognise such a defeat. Those who adhere to the notion of post-work, those who support it, are both. And I've tried to replace the word in the previous slide. Ooh, I don't know what is going on. So we had words such as defeatist and naive. I replaced those words by they are dejected, dispirited, unhopeful, prophets of doom. I found this online. I found it so cool that I included this. I'm not sure you would use it in casual conversation. And they are naive. Naive, other words for naive are guileless, wide-eyed, credulous, or gullible. So see, every single time, all I'm doing is I'm paraphrasing in my own words, okay, with more vocabulary. Post-work denies that there might be unavoidable conflicts and tensions between various groups of interest. Remember what we said, it's unavoidable, it's absolutely necessary at some point that there might be tensions between people. Like, it's the natural thing that happens. Okay, what do people do with their free time? Interesting questions. What are you doing in your spare time? Well, according to the text, remember this example with Madagascar and the post-war years. I'm not going to read it again, but people started socializing more and they become more creative. Okay, so I've tried to sum that up, saying the example illustrating what people might dedicate their time to when not working. That's a very long first sentence. Like, that's a long subject, sorry. There you go. So, I could remove all of this for those who don't like long sentences, because the example is, okay, but I wanted to give more details about the example. So the example is in Madagascar, where people indulged in. To indulge in is to provide yourself with pleasure. I don't know how this will be interpreted. Indulge in abundant, because I wanted to say they socialized a lot, so I replaced this with abundant socializing and gossiping. Once again, not sure gossiping is very nice, but anyway, it fostered the social bond, which means it reinforced. I love the word fostered. Okay, foster is to reinforce, to strengthen, okay, to reinforce the social bond, okay, to make it closer, to weave it all together in the community, and never once were they bored. That sounds like the end of a fairy tale, right? So this is, they were never bored. Never were they bored. Okay, I can place this at the beginning of my sentence, which forces me to reverse those two elements. You know about this already. Right, what would more leisure time bring to society? This is something we have covered already, so I'm not going to spend too much time. Remember this about like what to do with public buildings if they're not dedicated to work? Well, how did I sum that up? I used my if replaced by should. Should people have more time, which comes down to saying if people had more time on their hands, I drop my if, I replace it with should, and because I've got should, I do not conjugate the verb. So should people have more time on their hands, they would certainly devote it or dedicate it, right, spend it, to creative artistic activities such as poetry, theatre or music. I tried to cover what had been mentioned. Therefore, see, this is typical of my style. Comma and then therefore enriching their culture. It would also open the floodgates of, I love this, it basically means pave the way. To pave the way for, to open the floodgates of. City transformation, remember what they said? They want to transform buildings to turn them into artistic places and centres, as workplaces could be turned into libraries, leisure centres, or again, music decks. And there you go. So I will let you think about this because it is very interesting. I might post on Padlet a document in which I give you extra references regarding the thinkers who have proposed not to work. It goes back a long way, guys. It goes back to the 18th century. Some revolutionaries already were suggesting not working, sorry. So yeah, I might post this. Have a look into all the various elements we have mentioned as well, the UBI or post-truth, or all these ideas. And if you have any further questions, then do not hesitate. You do have an essay to write regarding that topic that I will be expecting. Do not forget that an essay will have to include personal references, personal knowledge, cultural knowledge. So dig into these various aspects in order to better